Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to, yes, the final session of presentations for ISBSA 16. Thank you all for staying the distance and being here for the last group of presentations following the ethnography theme. And we'll be having 4 papers, and I'll ask all the speakers please to keep to time, or we'll have the scientific committee breathing down our neck, who are due to chair the closing session at 4 o'clock. So don't feel any pressure at all, of course. Okay, so our first paper, I hope, will be Lucy Blue, John Cooper, Alessandro Guidoni on conceiving shell, conceiving frame, switching and blurring building of the Mwanda, Zanzibar, Tanzania. And I'm hoping that Lucy can hear me.
I can. Can you hear me?
And I can hear you. So it's all over to you, Lucy.
And you can see the screen okay, yeah?
The screen looks absolutely stunning.
Oh, thank you, Nigel. And well pronounced, by the way. It's a real shame that I can't be there, and want to say a big thank you to the steering committee for organising the conference. I just want to start by saying that I feel a slight fraud while presenting this paper, because most of the footwork that was put into this was done by John and Ali. So I'm just here presenting the results as per usual. I also want to thank the British Academy, who were the funders of this season of fieldwork. In fact, it was the British Academy on a Frost Foundation small grant that focuses on giving funding towards maritime-focused activities. I hasten to add that was to John and not to myself, but I would encourage others to look at this, because it is a means of funding maritime fieldwork beyond the Honor Frost Foundation remit. I'd also want to thank my colleagues and collaborators on the ground, including the inspector, Abdullah Ali, who was way more than an inspector. He located most of the sites. And most importantly, the boat builder, Mr. Hamdan, who you'll meet shortly. And we would like to dedicate this paper in the memory of Professor Sean McGrail, who was not only a founder member of this amazing conference series, ISBSA, but as my professor, he also gave me the first opportunity to study living traditional working boats and recognise the value that they bring to the Archaeological Forum. And for that, I am extremely grateful. I will, of course, hasten to add that he probably won't necessarily agree with all the conclusions that we've reached, but there we go. Anyway, thank you very much, and I will start with the paper. This is one really to make another step closer to dispelling some of our myths, hence the title of the paper. And whilst we're obviously working with contemporary boat builders, I think it does provide a bit more of that insight into the mindset of the boat builder, another favourite theme of mine, in terms of how he perceives shape and dependence upon planking and framing. And hopefully this can aid our archaeological thinking and interpretation of archaeological finds. So setting the scene, if I can get the slide to go forward. This is the dreadful location that we had to go and work in Tanzania and the island of Zanzibar. And this was in 2018 when we undertook this research. And the red ring shows you the location of Chinanzini, the boat yard where we were working. The season lasted around 2 or 3 weeks, and whilst the objective of the fieldwork wasn't just to work with Mr. Hamdan, and here he is, the Fundi or master boat builder, it was also to record other types of traditional craft on the island. But we revisited this site many, many times, almost on a daily basis. And as a result of that, we were able to see the sequence of build. We'd missed a few things, but it really did inform our understanding of the process of building of this boat. And the particular one that we focused on for this presentation is the Ungwanda boat. There were many other different types that were recorded, and you can read all about them in our forthcoming IJNA article. But the Ngwanda was particularly fascinating for the reasons that hopefully you will concur with shortly. It was a small working boat, roughly 10 meters in length, about 2.4 meters wide and 1.2 meters high. Obviously, they varied, they weren't all identical. And we saw this boat under repair, that's number A. We've recorded it using photogrammetry. We witnessed it working off beaches and mooring offshore and sailing, etc. So we had a full understanding of the working life, but most importantly for this paper, the construction of the vessel. So the big research question that we want to present, and I'd love to share your thoughts on this afterwards, is this boat shell-led or frame-led? So Mr. Hamdan, the boat builder himself, says that the framing timbers are the most important element in determining the shape of the hull. He should know, as he is the person building the boat. By definition, this seems to suggest that the vessel is a frame-led construction if the very person building it says he is being led by framing. It may not be frame first, but it is frame-led. However, it does appear over the weeks of monitoring this that the situation is more complex. So what I'd like to do is lead you through the construction sequence, or at least enough of an idea to give you an idea of the complexity that we observed over the days we visited the site and through discussions with Mr. Hamdan. Oh, I pressed it twice, sorry. Okay, so the first stage, and as you can see, there's huge attention to health and safety on this site, but the boat builders were just amazing. What they couldn't do with an axe was quite incredible. And I should have brought my bow drill. I learned some bow drilling skills while I was there as well. But anyway, the vessel seems to be conceived as we have, as demonstrated in the early stages by the sighting of its framing elements along the keel. So you can see, oh, sorry, I think I missed a bit there. Okay, yeah, so the first thing that Mr. Hamdan does after laying the keel, which you can see top left, rabbiting it, which you can see bottom left, and then fixing the stem and stern posts, is to measure and mark out the position of the floors and futtocks and half frame stations along the entire length of the keel. And those are the large red arrows that you can't possibly miss on the right-hand side. Each framing set comprises either a floor and two futtocks or two half frames, and these two configurations alternate along the length of the hull at fixed points 4 inches apart. The combination of floors and futtocks and half frames are perceived as one unit, one framing set, therefore each 8 inches apart. So it's clear that the positioning and regular configuration of the framing timbers is preconceived and predetermined, even if these framing timbers are not yet put in place. Equally, the siting and spacing of the framing timbers at this stage is clearly not determined by the particular requirements of the moulded surfaces. They are ultimately created by the planks, since these don't yet exist, nor by any points of weakness along the surface of the hull, again, because they are no longer in situ. So it's being led by frames at this stage. I think we'd all agree on that. So the next stage, and we can see here the heating of the plank. So next we observe that the garboard strakes, and indeed the second strakes, are built up from the keel before any framing timbers are fixed. The planks of this initial phase are shaped through heat bending over fire and by weighting using large wooden levers that are fixed around the plank, and also by using windlasses. No frames or quasi-frames or temporary frames are used in this phase in order to achieve the crucial hull shape at this early stage. Although, as you can see in the picture on the bottom right, some battens were used to secure the location of the second strake, as this was not at this point nailed into the garboard having already been nailed into the keel. So at this stage in the proceedings, we think it would be fair to assume that this is more a shell-led build. Next stage, and here you can see the first floor timbers being placed in the lower hull. Next, when the first 4 floors, i.e. floors 4, 5, 6 and 7, are presented to the emerging hull, it is these that are trimmed in order to accommodate the curve that has been determined by the first strakes of the planking. As additional strakes are added, the upper ends of the floors are reduced to accommodate the planking accordingly. It seems then that this part of the build, the very beginning of the formation of the shell, is still being shell-led. So moving to the next stage. This is when the frames or the frame stations are introduced. And you can see the various different techniques that I'm going to describe here with Mr. Hamdan with his metal rod and the shear string that runs from the stem to the stern post, etc. It is about this time that the third strakes are completed. It is about the time that the third strake is completed that another change takes place in the build of the hull. Now, 3 pairs of half frames are installed into the vessel at the predetermined locations along the hull, as previously noted. These stations and the timbers are permanently fixed and then secured laterally by cross members set athwart between the tops of each pair of the frames. The widths of the frames are determined by Mr. Hamdan, so he determines the actual breadth of the boat using what we're describing as a preconceived mental formula, which he did discuss actually, that is based basically upon visualization and no doubt having built a number of Ngwanda, his previous and vast experience as a boat builder. Their curvature is also determined by Mr. Hamdan's experience as a builder, again, his eye. These 3 pairs are followed by another 2 pairs that are placed at the extremities of the vessel. The resulting 5 half frames form the frame base for the attachment of all planking that follows. The bottom of the curve and thus the shape of the final 2 pairs of half frames is determined by the shell-led planking already in place, roughly below the turn of the bilge or at the turn of the bilge. This is particularly acute, or this shaping is particularly acute at the bow and to the lesser extent the stern, where the hull shape and strakes narrow and rise. However, the top of the curve is determined by the shape of the other 3 half frame stations. Mostly, Mr. Hamdan uses his eye to turn from the plane of the lower planking to the point that is determined by the string that is run between the top of each station. And you can see him adjusting that curve there relative to the lower hull planking and the string that runs across the shear level effectively. This string corresponds to the shear of the boat. Hence, the shape of the additional stations depends on the position and the cross-sectional dimension of the half-frame stations forward and aft. At this stage, we found it difficult to we cannot disentangle shell versus frame-led approach here. Both are evident in the same action. These 5 half-frame pairs, together with the ultimate convergent points provided by the transom, the stern plate, and the stem post, are the principal fixed points around which the planking is subsequently bent in order to achieve the hull shape. However, stations just give a rough, but not the final shape for the hull, and we can consider this phase as a frame-guided construction, although, as you will see, there's some wiggle room in this interpretation. So, continuing on, it is around these 5 frame pairs that the shear stroke is now fixed. This is fixed along the top of these framing pairs, so they go from the lower hull right to the top of the boat on the shear. And as a consequence, a large gap between this and the shell-led planking around the bilges of the vessel appears, that you can see on the left. After the shear stroke, the second and third strakes are built downwards, counting from the shear towards the hull base. As these upper strakes are attached to the 5 half frames, it seems inarguable that this is a frame-guided phase within the overall construction schema. The planking is being wrapped around the fixed points of the framing timbers. You can see in all of these images. But next, adjusting the stations. So the next thing that we observed was that, however, the curvature of the shear stroke reveals that some of the stations were not exactly in the right place as Mr. Hamdan had perceived it. Hence, some of the frames were adjusted, and you can see them using the adds there, adjusting the frame shape to accommodate the planking. Once again, we cannot disentangle shell versus frame-led approaches here. So yeah, this is a question mark at the end of this one. So we're moving to the final stages now. At this stage of the build, these 5 stations are the only full height framing timbers in place within the construction, apart from some of the floor timbers that we mentioned above. As additional half frame timbers and also upper futtocks are now added between the original 5 pairs, what now guides the placement of the new frames is the upper planks that are already in place, and therefore this appears once again a shell-led phase within the build. Indeed, the outer-sided facing of the framing timbers is again added in order to accommodate it to the curving moulded plane of the planking. Although, of course, you could argue that the shape was further predetermined by the half frames, but so we're calling it shell-led with a little bit of framing in there. So on to the final phase. And this is when the remaining planks are basically filled in. So they're filled downwards until they meet the lower planking already in place below the bilge. Drop strakes or strakes of planking that are discontinuous near the bow or stern because of decreasing hull surface area, basically central steelers, can be completed only when most of the frames are in place. Again, this part can only be interpreted as frame-led. So a mix and a muddle, I hope you agree. And just to sort of wrap this up, I hope I'm in time. The discussion. So the Ngwanda can be seen to be constructed in alternating phases of frame-led and shell-led construction, all around a supposed frame-conceived build. Vessels of these broadly clenched nail construction method in the Western Indian Ocean are often said to be of mixed construction. Yet this rather meagre definition entirely fails to capture the specificity and technical richness of Mr. Hamdan's build. Moreover, mixed runs against Mr. Hamdan's own position that the frames are the most important element in determining the overall shape of the hull. We feel there are lessons learned to be observed in observing Mr. Hamdan's construction for our archaeological conception of hull form and how it is arrived at. First, it seems that dividing the nautical world into vessels that are shell-built, those that are frame-built, and those that are mixed, together with variances such as bottom-built, rather fails to capture the nuance of global nautical conditions. In particular, the term mixed, applied for everything that is not purely shell or purely frame, would appear to be entirely unfit for purpose. This leads to another point, that is the academic tendency to impose our preconceived terms of global boat building, privileging those terms over those of the actual builder. This is particularly patronising the case of the living boat build, the traditional boat builds, in contrast to the archaeological boat finds, who don't have the voice of the builder directly fueling interpretations. So obviously, we're reflecting on an ethnographic or a traditional contemporary build. Finally, these reflections were not just restricted to our more focused observations of Mr. Hamdan's Ngwanda build. In other places, builders also adopted a very different approaches to building vessels according to, amongst other things, the availability of materials, switching between shell and frame-led construction. Whilst we acknowledge that we were dealing with so-called ethnographic material, not archaeological boat finds, and as I have stated previously, we need to be cautious about applying analogous interpretations. It can also be observed that perhaps the lesson we take as archaeologists from Mr. Hamdan's build is that there may well be more than one way to skin a cat. Thank you.
Has his hand up. I'm going to throw a microphone at you.
Pat, oh no, I told him not to ask any awkward questions.
I know, he's irrepressible, he can't stop.
Shall I stop sharing the screen, or maybe it'll be useful? Go on then, I'm waiting.
Hi, Lucy.
Hello.
Thanks very much for the interesting presentation. Just one very quick question first, and then the second part is a comment on your thought process. When you said they fitted the garboard plank, am I correct that you also said they fit the second strake and possibly the third strake before fitting the floor timbers?
Yeah, they did. Although they only nailed the garboard to the keel, they didn't nail the second strake to the garboard or the. I mean, it varied between boats as well. Some had two, a garboard for second and third, and some only had garboard and second. So it's not, it's not all one size fits all. But the nailing was only to the keel.
Yes,
but yeah,
the second and third strake are just
exactly. They're held on by these little battens that are temporary and then removed.
okay. And then they switched to what you describe as the frame led.
Yes. Well, they put the floors in first, which they have pre-considered. They use the metal frame to shape, or to a certain extent, because obviously the central section of the hull is going to be more similar. As we go towards the ends, it's going to change quite dramatically. But so they place the floors, and then sort of adds the edges of the frame. Of the floors to fit the planking that had been presented on the base of the hull. And then they moved on to the more frame-led stage.
Yes, then the 5 stations, we call them, whatever we want to label them.
I think we needed a diagram, actually. It would have been helpful. As I was reading, I was thinking a diagram would really help.
Yeah, so I'd be quite happy with that it's now become a frame-led construction method. And in my own experience with our version of frame-based, frame-led, whatever we call it, we then attach light battens, ribbons to connect the bow to the stern, passing around these pre-erected frames, and we then use that as the guide to shape the remaining frames. So those ribbons are allowing us to find the shape of the intermediary frames.
Yes.
The only difference I see in this scenario is rather than putting a ribbon, a light batten, which we later take off and throw away.
Yeah, we've got a shear string.
Your man is fitting his guide as the finished plank.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then again, he adds the second plank down from the top, same as we do in our part of the world.
Yeah, which is quite interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
But he's then you're then saying it switches back to a shell-based approach because he's using those planks to find his other shapes for the intermediate frames.
Well, again, this all comes down to definition, doesn't it, as well? But so I think that bit is more discussable because reading through our notes, you would think if you ignored the previous stage that by fashioning the shapes of the futtocks or the frames or whatever it is that they're putting in next, in terms of trying to get it to fit nicely with the hull, then the shape of the planking is determining the shape of the frames. But in fact, if you go the step back again, the frames predetermined where that shear line went, etc., etc. So I think that's one of the main reasons why we gave it this switching and blurring as a title. And I think you're absolutely right, Pat. This isn't unique, but I think what we're trying to achieve by this is to actually just demonstrate through that process that it's applying these terms they can actually be misleading, misguiding, and I think that we need to think of a little bit more about how the builder is reacting, I guess, and implying his knowledge and working with the timber, all the things that you've taught me to think about for years now. In respect to feeling his way through the boat build, but with certain very clear parameters in which that build is constructed.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, there are further questions, but we are going to have to move on. I'm sorry, ladies. Definitely a follow up. I'm sure there are more questions for you, Lucy, and I'm sure people will follow up and want to talk. I need to know whether they leave any marks behind, but we'll not go there. I think we have to move on to the next paper. So thank you very much, Lucy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so we're moving on to our second paper today in the session, and the paper is provided by John Cooper, Alessandro Guidoni, Chiara Zazzaro, and Shadi Kalantar, who will be the person presenting it in real life for us. So thank you very much. Contextualizing the forgive me, you can tell me when it's wrong, Bagara Amalay Sown, a fishing boat at the Persian Gulf Coast, Iran.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I know you all are tired. I do my best not to be boring. So, what is it boring? Oh, okay. Okay, first of all, I wanted to thank all the organizers of this conference. I know it's not easy with half online and half in person, so I appreciate it very much. Thank you very much. So today, I'll be talking about some little boats, but with a bigger story to tell. I want to tell you a story about this boat. I will be talking about the last evidence of bitumen-covered stone boats of Iran, which used to be quite commonplace all around the Western Indian Ocean once, but probably these boats are the last evidence from those boats. Well, the story began when my colleagues, I mean the other authors of this presentation except me, documented some bitumen-covered stone boats in Qatar Museum, which were purchased in Iran. They followed two main goals in their work. The first one was to make a detailed documentation of these boats for the first time. And the second one was to figure out the building sequences of these boats, which they did and published in IJNA in 2019. And when I was doing my own field research for my PhD, which is exactly like what Ziad is doing in Egypt, but I'm doing this in Iran, I found this boat. It was bitumen covered, it was sewn, and it was just similar from those in Qatar Museum that my colleagues work on. And this is where I joined this project. And so the following integrates my colleagues' previous documentation and my close observation and interview with the boat builders, because I could find the sons of the builder of this boat. So this is the methodology that my colleagues applied. They did traditional recording like measurement and description. And also they did 3D photogrammetry, and they made this really amazing 3D models of it. My supervisor insists on it. They are really amazing. And using the 3D models, they made novel lines and construction drawings. And with using this construction drawings and novel lines and 3D models, they made like reverse engineering, and they could figure out the building sequences. And later, when I was interviewing the boat builders, I realized that actually whatever they find out was right. And also my interview just completed the documentation and their interpretation of these boats. So back in 2019, when my colleagues were working at Qatar Museum, they've been told that these boats were purchased somewhere in Iran and brought to Doha from Bandar Lenge, the point that you see there. And but they didn't know about the exact provenance of these boats. And also they thought that these boats are called Bagara. And actually these boats are registered at Qatar Museum as Bagara. But when I was doing my field research, I realized actually they are called Amela. They are really similar to a type which is called Bagara, but they are different. I will explain you later why they are different. And also I realized that this bitumen covered stone boats are distribution, actually their distribution is really confined and limited. Those blue lines are blue dots actually are the places that I could track this type of boat. So its distribution is only limited to west of Hormuzgan, west of the Strait of Hormuz, between the lines you see, and not even more west into the Bushehr, only this area. Unlike Amela, Bagara, the other type is quite widespread and common all along the Persian Gulf and also Sea of Oman. I myself observed 3 or 4 in the green spots that you see here. So this is what is generally called Bagara, exactly this shape, and also Bagara could be used for fishing, for cargo, even as ferry. But this is what is called Amela, you see on the top in Iran, and that one is what is called Bagara in Iran. You can see the differences. Actually, Amela is necessarily sewn and bitumen covered, but Bagara is nor sewn, neither bitumen covered, it's nailed. And also Bagara is slightly bigger, and their function is totally different. Bagara could be used literally for anything, but Amela is used only in a specific method of fishing, which is called Amela as well. I will explain it later. And this is the satur of this Amela boat. Satur could be considered something like bowsprit, but it's not exactly bowsprit. So anyway, the one on the left belongs to the boats that were taken to Qatar Museum, and this one belongs to the one that I found in Iran, in Bostana, village of Bostana. So let's call this one Bostana Amele and the other one QM Amele. And the sons of the builder of that boat told me that the figures and patterns on the satur could represent the builder of the craft. So the patterns, all these things you see in the satur could be kind of signature of its builder. And as you see, they are different. I mean, the one at Qatar Museum has this incision, like that triangle one there, which is slightly different from the incision on top of the other satur. And also you see the blue color, the remains of the blue color on the other one, which tell us that these boats had different builders. And these two gentlemen are the builders, are the sons of the builder of that boat. And the gentleman in the middle is the one who helped me to find them. And this is me with my happiest face ever behind the mask. Like, I found them. And this is straight faces of them, like, when do we get rid of her? When do we get rid of her? About the function of Amela, actually it is used only for catching sardines or small fish like this. Actually, the name of Amela is taken from the net they use for catching this fish. Amela is a net with very small holes, which is only used for this kind of fish. And the fishing technique is like that. They actually go into the water. They never go further than 1 or 2 miles. And even when I asked the builders, why don't you use nails for these boats? They were like, because it's not worth it. It's not supposed to go any further than 2 miles. So why do we use nails? But so they go into the water with 4 rowers to paddle, make a semicircular tour in the water, and the other 2 on the opposite side drop the net, and then they come back to the coastline and roll up and collect the net. And this is it. This is what is called Amela as well. When I was at the village, I asked some children, where are your fathers? And they say they went to Amela. So the net, the boat, and the whole this activity, this fishing method, all is called Amela. And about the construction, the first piece that they put is the keel, and then they pierce it, and then they put the 2 garbos, which is called malish in their dialect, and then they put the wadding, and then they actually sewn all the two garbles with wadding between them and also keel all together at the same time, which leave this crisscross pattern both inside and outside. But for the rest of the planks, they put the planks, then put the wadding and then use bitumen on the wadding as well. And they sewn it like this with this pattern. And what you see from inside, this is this crisscross pattern. And what you see from outside is this. And also they use some dowels. And the builders told me that we use it every 4 fingers. So with that, their hands, it must be around like 7 centimeters, which was true. And since it's a shell-first boat, then they put the frame, and the frame is like half frame, full frame, alternated, which is not surprising because it's the most common framing method in Iran, in south of Iran, better to say. And one of the things that I'm doing is collecting the terms, the maritime terms, and make a maritime vocabulary of the Iranian southern dialects, because actually no maritime vocabulary exists in today's modern Persian that we speak, because the Persians that living in the center of Iran are so far away from all the seas. But unlike modern Persian, unlike standard Persian, there are a lot of dialects, local dialects all along the coastline in south and east, north of Iran that have a really, really rich maritime vocabulary, which is not documented and which is also unknown even for us Iranians. So I'm trying to collect these terms and do some lexicographic study all along my own study. And these are some terms which are related to amela. For example, keel is called bis, and half frame is called shalmun, full frame is called atfa, and tafar is that generally refers to steam, and that satur, which was broken and was split. I just abandoned somewhere else. I went and found it. And also, as for the materials, according to the builder brothers, they use a kind of local tree, which is called Arabic gum tree. We call it karat for the keel and for the frame because it's dense and strong. But as for the shell, they use mango tree, which they had to import from India. And when I asked the reason, they told me because mango is porous. So while in the water, it cannot absorb water and becomes larger and squeeze and press the layers of batting and help with its waterproofing because it's coral built and also it has layers of batting, which is kind of glass. So it's really smart. And as for the batting, they use a kind of local grass bromus provision. And for the ropes, they use something that is called kambar. It's a rope which is made from coconut husk or sometimes palm husk, date palm husk. And for the tools, these are some of the tools that they use for making these bows. I'm sure you all are familiar with the drill, with bow drill, and that one on the top is the bow of the drill, like troller of the drill. And actually, there's a poster here. You can see what bow drill is if you already don't know. But I'm sure that one is new for you. That is called makassar and is used for making the rope. They put the husk in those angles and then troll it and make the rope. So for the conclusion, the most important thing for us was this methodology, doing both interviews all along with the detailed documentation from 3D models. Because without interviews, we couldn't understand the exact provenance of this boat, neither the materials, because my colleagues were not allowed to take samples at Qatar Museum. And also we didn't know about the tools, and we should keep interviewing boat builders before this very last generation of boat builders will be gone forever. And there are so many people who help us. We are so glad to have them. And thank you very much for your attention. And I know you were really tired. Thank you. Am I on time?
Thank you, Shelley, for that fascinating paper and for keeping so well to time.
Well, if you don't mind, can I ask me the first question?
Yeah, that's unusual, but of course you can.
Okay, so the question would be, okay, Shadi, you found this boat, but what happened to this boat after you found it? Did you just leave it on the coastline, like abandoned like it used to be? The answer would be, wow, what a good question. I've been waiting for that. No, I didn't, of course not. Actually, I'm working in an institute for boat building studies in a really little town in south of Iran called Bandar Kong. So when I found this boat, I went back to that town and talked to the mayor that it's really important. This is the last sound boat that we have in Iran. We should preserve it. We should take care of it. So he came with me. Actually, he drove me himself to that village and talked to the owners of that boat and convinced them to let us to take it back to Bandar Kong and preserve it and put it in an exhibition. But it wasn't really that much easy. We couldn't move this boat. We hardly could touch this boat because it was really fragile. It was being like, it's been built like 80 years ago, and it's been abandoned for like 20 years under the sun in 50-degree, 80% humidity. So it was really fragile. So another day we went back with a local boat builder, which we call Gallaf. And he made an external stand for it, wood and iron external stand for it. And we actually put it with that stand. We didn't touch the boat itself. We didn't touch the shell, neither the frames. We pulled it from the stand and we moved it to Bandar Kong, and now it's under the repairing process. And we discussed about repairing the methodology a lot, maybe for 3 months, because I thought we should not touch, I thought we should not remove or replace anything. I just wanted to preserve it as it actually is at the moment. So we are just trying to fix some parts of the frames which are gone or which are not usable anymore. And we want to make a transparent shell to put it in that shell from outside. So in this way, we do not have to move the bitumen coat. We neither do have to replace any of the frames or any of the planks. And after that, sorry. After that, because we was really happy with this boat, we started to collect more boats. So yeah, now we have a collection of 5 endangered boats to preserve and put on exhibitions. And we keep searching for new ones.
Okay, thank you very
I'm
much,
done with my
Shadi, for your question.
questions.
We do have just a minute. If there is any other questions, yes, we have one. Yes, like that. Sorry, could you pick your microphone up a piece so that people on Zoom can hear you, please?
Meanwhile, I can answer the first question. Well, actually, I think what you mentioned is bagala, the one that you saw in Syria. No, that is a totally different type. That's a sheep. That's not a boat. That's a giant sheep. And I couldn't find any of that yet in Iran except some pictures. But bagala is different. But the terminology of bagara, it's really complicated. Originally, we actually put it in this PowerPoint. But because we had only 15 minutes, we thought maybe it's too complicated and we should remove it. But the thing is that DNS's edges suggest that it has a Persian root. But I'm a Persian speaker, and actually I think it makes no sense in Persian, neither in local dialects. And also some believe that it comes from Arabic bagara, which means cow, because it's a little bit like cow, some believe, I don't. Could be, but there is a tribe living in Africa called exactly Bagara, with same spelling and with same pronunciation. I personally believe it has something to do with that.
Okay, I'm going to, not just for a technical fault, but also because we have to move on, and I suggest we follow on discussion afterwards, please. Okay, thank you very much, Shadi.
Thank you.
Okay, so our third paper is going to be jointly delivered by Joana Bacho and Gonzalo Correa Lopez. The dugout canoe from Sao Tome and Principe, the results of an archaeoanthropological mission.
Okay, hi everyone. Let's see if I can manage this. So we would like to begin by congratulate the organization for the symposium and also to say thank you for the opportunity to be here presenting our work. First, I would like to say to you that this work and this mission, more than archaeology or anthropology, was and still is an observation and recording exercise, a small part of a bigger work that we are preparing about canoes and traditional fishing in São Tomé. The work that led to this presentation was carried out on the scope of Project Concha, an European Commission funded staff exchange project based on Cham Center for the Humanities of the Nova University of Lisbon. The project main goal is to address the different ways port cities develop around the Atlantic Ocean during the early modern period. It integrates activities within ocean's cultural heritage, archaeology, history, environment, literature, and photography. As for our mission, the goal were to make contacts and to do a first approach to the maritime cultural heritage. We wanted to develop the study of the Santomean canoes, seeking to document and understanding their construction process, from the cutting of the tree to their use on the water. São Tomé and Príncipe is located on the Atlantic Ocean in the Gulf of Guinea, above the equator line, which determines two distinct climates during the year. Between October and May is the time for heavy rains, violent thunderstorms, and high temperatures. During June and September, we have the so-called gravana, which characterized by dry weather and almost no precipitation. The island of São Tomé was discovered by the Portuguese navigators in December 1470 and the Príncipe in January 1471. Its settlements begins in the 1418s in the process very similar to that developed by the Portuguese crown on the island of Madeira, Azores, and Cape Verde. Over the years, the island were occupied and transformed by different agriculture crops like sugar, coffee, and cocoa. The society formed by Portuguese foreigners, slaves, and freedmen went through many scenarios of socio-political tension and rebellion. The plantations, or roças, were sites of constant tension between subjugators and subjugated. A few decades after the widely known Cadbury case in the early 20th century, tensions escalated, giving rise to the Batpa massacre, a terrible day in the history of this country caused by the Portuguese authorities. It was from this misfortune that the seeds of São Tomé and Príncipe's independence, achieved in 1975, were born.
And now the mission itself. Like almost everywhere else in the world, in São Tomé and Príncipe, the fishing communities are quite united and close. The contact with the two fishing communities with whom we interacted was only possible through previous personal contacts. During the mission, we were able to watch the start of a canoe cutting and to record one canoe in use and another one during the process of carving. The data collection was done through informal interviews where we talked to the local fishermen and builders. The recording was based on three phases: identifying the canoe to be recorded, authorizing access to it, and the recording itself, which mainly involved photogrammetry, detailed photographs, and direct measurements. The post-processing of the photogrammetry and drawing was done through the normal softwares, Photoscan, Metashape, and AutoCAD. Here you can see the two canoes recorded. This is the bigger one, was 9 meters, and this is the smaller one, around 5 meters. The process of transforming Santomian canoes begins with the choice of the tree to be used, and this is always planned according to the lunar cycle. The best time to choose and cut is 3 days before or after the new moon. Before cutting, it is necessary to study the tree well, its circumference, the position of its trunk and branches, the surrounding area where the tree will fall, and the best route for the later transportation. The carving sequence has 3 phases. First, the outline of the canoe is marked on the trunk with an X. The canoes are carved in a way that their base coincides with the central area of the trunk to avoid the sapwood. Normally, the stern is located at the base of the trunk and the bow at the top, taking advantage of the tree's own morphology. In the past, several cuts were made with an X in the trunk until reaching the sapwood, and then the remaining parts between the cuts were chopped. Currently, the outer parts are cut with a chainsaw. In the second phase, the remaining excesses are removed and the overall shape of the canoe with double bow or stern panel is checked. In the third and final phase, the torso is hollowed out while continuing to shape the vessel. As they move towards the end, they smooth out the surfaces. At the same time, they check the thickness of the entire canoe, which should be about 2 fingers thick. The most used tools are the machete, axe, hoe, planer, gouge, auger, and nowadays the chainsaw, but just for the larger cuts. The final touches are done in the villages. In this phase, the goals are to reduce the thickness of the hull, especially on the outside, and to soften it. It should be noted that the bottom should always be thicker than the sides, since its exposure is greater both in the water and on land when dragged. The bow is usually higher and tapered, and the stern lower and wider, and can also be tapered or cut, forming a kind of small straight stern panel. This change is recent and is very much related to the introduction of outboard engines in the 1970s. Finally, the canoes are launched into the water, which is always a cause for rejoicing, materialized in a great celebration with music, dancing, and palm wine. Repairs occur when necessary, and there are different ways of carrying them out. The most recurrent solution are wooden molds with tar reinforcement. They can also use air chambers or leftover tires, or filling of fissures with tire and some metallic patches that are fixed with iron nails, or nowadays pieces of plastic, small sheets of fiberglass, and also white glue. In São Tomé and Príncipe, there are 3 standardized sizes for canoes. The smaller ones are 3 to 4 meters long. The medium is 8 to 10, and the large canoes can reach 15 meters. However, on average, they are between 4 and 12 meters long, 90 centimeters wide, and 35 to 45 centimeters deep. In the case of smaller canoes, the crew consists of 1 or 2 persons. The larger canoes can be crewed by up to 8 people. There is no distinction between river, mangrove, or sea canoes, as they are versatile enough. The tasks that canoes perform range from fishing near or far from the coast, both during the day and at night, but also in transport goods, animals, and even people. The species most used locally in the construction of canoes are Samauma, acacia, breadfruit tree, African crabwood, cedar tree, and mulberry tree. This is just a first approach to the species that are used in São Tomé and Príncipe. And we try to connect the local name to the Portuguese English name and then the scientific name, which were not an easy task. And we asked Nigel and help. So it's really difficult. The lifespan of a canoe is about 2 to 3 years. But if the wood is good, harvested at the right time, and constructed with skill, it can be used for 12 or even 15 years. A canoe that navigates mainly in salt water has a shorter life because of the wear and tear caused by the salt-sun combination. In this photo, we can observe a premonition to the future. The iron boat sunk, the wooden canoe is put aside, and the fiberglass boat is operating. Today, some fishermen use the outboard combustion engine as a means of propulsion. However, since the buy and the engine of an engine and its maintenance are very expensive for the economic standards of São Toméan fishermen, there are still many who continues to use the paddles. Sorry, I forgot to. In these cases, some canoes even rig sails made of burlap reused from flour bags or nowadays plastic bags.
The canoes are a fundamental element in the life of the São Toméans, and many of the activities practiced are only possible through their use. Fishing, for instance, is the income of more than half the population, while the other half is divided between agriculture, livestock farming, services, or tourism. Even those who have another kind of activities also fishes. There's a saying on the islands, every São Toméan is a fisherman. The acquisition of the canoes is done in several ways. They can be bought, paying all the expenses to the builder, or favors can be exchanged with the builder and the people he needs to hire. The price can also be negotiated according to the work that the acquirer can do. Several people can also get together to buy a canoe, forming a kind of cooperative, which then materialize into a fishing company, sharing expenses and profits. These cooperatives also become responsible for families that for some reason lose their income. The division of labor is well defined. The construction and repair of the canoes is done exclusively by men. Fishing is almost entirely done by men, at least the part that takes place at the sea. And there are only very sporadic cases of women participating in fisheries. For example, some women have skills that can help the crew, like being traditional healers. But we were told about exceptional cases, like when a husband became physically or mentally disabled and his wife was authorized by the community chief to take his place at sea. When the fish comes ashore, the role of women is determinant since they arrange, transport, and sell the fish. They are also the ones that put the fish into the dryers and control the entire drying process. Canoes fulfill their many purposes in the service of communities, and several find new use even though their life has reached the end at sea, either as a bench, a flower bed, a storage place, or simply decoration objects in the garden of resorts. In any case, they continue to strongly mark the physical and cultural Santomian landscape. Just for some final remarks, the construction logic of the Santomian dugout canoes has not changed substantially since centuries. Coeval writing and iconographic sources from the Gulf of Guinea region indicate so. Of course, there are technical changes such as the use of new tools or mechanized transport or the add/remove of some features. As we could observe and told about, the number of canoes being built today is far fewer than in the past. This decrease is related to the environmental concerns of the Santomian ecosystem by the government and by the population. For example, in Prince Island, there is a forest management policy where only people with specific profession can cut trees, carpenters or canoes builders, for instance. At the same time, there is a growing difficulty in finding quality raw material in areas closest to the village. Therefore, nowadays, it is necessary to go further and further into the dense forest to find the right tree species, which very few are interested to do. Also, there was the introduction of fiberglass boats, more robust, durable, and cost-effective, which have gradually replaced the dugout canoes. Finally, the younger one seems to have lost interest in learning the techniques of this type of construction, either because they want a job in other economic area or because this is a knowledge considered to be obsolete. Of the 3 builders we spoke to, only one is passing on his knowledge. On the other hand, the workshop for the construction of fiberglass boats is very active and young people are employed. As soon as it's possible to restart the Concha project, it is our intention to return to São Tomé with several goals in mind. To be part of the full process of building a canoe, to participate in the traditional fishing day at sea, and through the previous points to strengthen the relationship started in 2020 in order to deepen the knowledge about the mystique and symbolism present in the entity that is the canoe. We also want to return all the data collection to the communities so they can keep it, value it, and perpetuate their traditions. We want to thank to all the persons and institutions that made this mission possible, and thank you so much for your pensies.
Thank you very much, both of you. I'm going to take advantage of the chair and just point out, I cannot believe the biodiversity of this set of islands. I had a quick look and there are 415 different species of tropical hardwoods growing on these islands. To put that in context, in Britain, there are 26 species of hardwood trees that are native to Britain, and about 4 of them might be useful for making bricks with. So trying to identify exactly what is meant by these local terms is less than easy, but also fascinating. And it seems there is an incredibly rich resource there, even if, as you imply, that is perhaps degrading over time. But that's definitely a challenge and a very interesting aspect of the project. So fascinating. Okay, do we have any questions, please? We have a
Hello, I'm Jyoti from Kapaskari. I'd like to ask you, okay, you mentioned before that there are special able to cut the tree for the dugout. And did you gain this information from carpenters, or you had the opportunity to follow them during the process?
No. Well, once we get into the site where they were starting to excavate the trunk, there was a photo of a big already cut tree. There was just like that. As for the choice of the tree, usually it's the builder, the canoe builder, who choose the tree, or some older guy at the village that goes into the several trunks. They knock on the tree and they choose the best one.
Okay, and what about the information about the moon, the period of the moon?
The information came in from the builder itself. We asked, they
Nice.
say 2-3 days before or after the.
Nice, thank you.
So,
Ah,
Beat,
yeah.
Thank you. Bert,
Everyone hear
question,
me?
did the people making offer when they are cutting the tree or when the boat is finished, they have special ceremonies or not?
When the boat is finished, we say that it's kind of a ceremony with palm wine, with dancing, with music, some kind of party. With in the moment that they find the proper tree, we never saw, but they say that they do some kind of gesture. We don't know what kind of gesture, but they do something. I don't know what, because they don't develop the subject. When we ask the subject, the response is very straight and end of discussion. Just like, yeah, we made some gesture.
So we need more time to learn those small things that are so important.
Maybe because it's more administrative action.
Yeah,
and they are not ready to present it to
it's a more personal or society, community.
okay, we have one question, which I think, no, John hasn't answered. Oh, John has answered on your behalf. What about seasoning? So after they cut the tree, do they start work straight away?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought that makes sense. These trees don't need any seasoning. They're as hard as the hardest tree you've ever come across. Okay, I think we'll need to stop it there, but a fascinating project and good luck. I really hope you get back there and reactivate this fascinating project. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm hoping that Brad is lurking in the background and going to provide us with the last paper of this session, and indeed the last paper of this year's ISBSA conference. So I'm hopeful at the other end of this system, there's Brad Duncan going to talk to us about strange craft in the Murray River, characterizing the archaeological signatures of river vessels in Australia's largest river system.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Brad, we hear you loud and
Great.
clear.
Excellent. Thank you. First off, I'd like to thank the organisers for having my paper in this session, and thanks to all the presenters. It's been an absolutely fabulous conference. I'm just going to give you a very brief and quick overview of a project we've been doing for about the last 10 years in New South Wales in Australia, where we've been looking at river systems up and down the coast. New South Wales is capital city, Sydney. We'll give everyone a bit of an idea where it is. I'll show you on a map in a second. Excuse me. But we've been doing this project in over 30 different river systems at the moment, and 11 or 12 different inland inlets, lakes, creeks, estuaries, etc. And we've been documenting to date over 1,000 different sites, including shipwrecks, but maritime infrastructure and river infrastructure associated with those sites. Just to give you an idea of where we're looking at, the Murray River is the longest river system in Australia. It's 2,500 kilometres long, and together with the Lachlan, Murrumbidgee and the Darling River up here, it covers about 8,000 kilometres of navigable river system. Now, in the 1990s, Sarah Candidine first did a study of the riverine resource, a heritage resource in those areas, which set a really good benchmark, but started off as an inventory, but never looked at the actual archaeological signatures of those sites. And it's a real shame because she adopted Krista Westerdale's maritime cultural landscapes approach, but no one ever picked it up and did anything more with it. I'll give you just this is an overview of where we're working. We started off at Echuca, which is about 3 hours north of Melbourne, and we moved up the river over the space of 3 days to Kundruk and then to Mildura. We were initially investigating reports of sites that were in the river that we knew uncovered when they removed the weir, which was part of a lock and weir system along the river. They would take it out for silt maintenance. And during that time, the water levels would gradually go down about 3 or 4 metres, and it would expose sites like you can see here. Now, when we first started doing this investigation, we knew there were about 3 or 4 sites there to start off with. And at the end of 3 days, we'd actually documented over 20. Half of those were actually found, as you can see in the top right-hand corner here, using side scan sonar in the rivers. But what we realised when we started to look at these sites is that we really weren't understanding what we were looking at. They didn't look anything like any craft that was oceanic in nature. There was no other craft like these had been documented in this region before. And so we realised in order to be able to recognise them and to characterise, we needed to characterise the archaeological signatures of these sites. And we also need to, from that, to try and look at new typologies of shipwreck sites and vessel types, which had never been documented before. Now, in order for us to do that, we worked collaboratively with a whole pile of people in the Murray River, but especially of great use were the shipbuilders and the ship restorers in the areas and the riverboat captains who also helped us understand how they used these vessels and the way they navigated them, why they were built the way they were, and their battling capacity and how they worked in the river systems themselves. To give you what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off, I'm going to talk about 2 different types. I'm not going to talk about paddle steamers here. We thought when we started we knew what paddle steamers looked like. We obviously didn't by the end. But what I want to talk about is actually the barges that were actually used behind the paddle wheels. They're called paddle boats down there. Some people call them paddle steamers, but they've got a completely different construction technique to those in the ocean, so they're called paddle boats down there. They were towed behind paddle boats. At least this type of barge that I'm looking at now is an insider paddle barge, and it was named for the obvious reason that you would put stuff inside it. It was used quite extensively in the timber industry, as you can see here. What they would do is they would chop down certain lengths of logs of Murray River red gum, which is a type of timber that's very, very hard wood, and it's very, very robust, but it doesn't float. So you can't train it down the river in a raft. You actually have to take it down with a vessel. So it was used quite extensively in the timber industry, but it was also used for general merchandise. And you can see here they're taking a traction engine down the river along with other materials for constructing one of the weirs. It was used quite extensively in the wool industry. From the 1870s to the late 1880s, Australia was the world's largest supplier of wool. And there was a rapid expansion of the use of the river as a transport route for navigation from its discovery in 1855. It was extensively used to take the seasonal wool clip from the sheep stations in the Darling River, especially down and to meet up with the wharves at Echuca and Morgan in South Australia. And both of those connected respectively to Melbourne and to Adelaide. Now, when we first started looking at these vessels, as I said, they were quite different to anything we'd looked at before. One of the first things we noticed, we first thought that what later turned out to be the stem was actually the stern post. The stem post on these vessels is almost twice the size of that of the stern. And these vessels also had, some of them had multiple bulkheads in them, and others only had 2, which formed a bow and stern compartment in them. When we first started looking at some of these still extant hulks, which are sitting on the side of the rivers, they were quite unusual in that they evidenced anything up to 6 sister keelsons or 2 sister keelsons and bilge stringers. And in this case, when we first looked at this vessel here, which is the Ada barge, we were wondering why this vessel wasn't watertight, because the keelsons went straight through the middle of it. And we later found out, if you can see this on the side here, there was a fixture called a compensation iron, which was a local innovation that they used for caulking around the iron and the edges of the keelson itself to make it waterproof. So we were wondering whether the watertight bulkheads on these things were actually used as a structural member to actually protect the side of the vessel, because they didn't have any deck beams in the middle of them. This was further had us thinking, and when we first had a look at it, there were these timbers, which I initially called diagonal braces. No one seemed to know what they were when we first started asking local people about it. And they definitely weren't frames of a vessel. They went diagonally from the gunnel, and it looked like it was going down towards the keelson of the vessel. When we started looking at other vessels that were in further up the river that people had told us about, we didn't even recognise the archaeological signatures of them. We were told the exact locations of where they were. This is one of the vessels, one of the insider barges used for logging. And the only thing that we had there was a square section frame with iron flat bar attached to 2 sides of it. And it was only on later inspection of our photos again that we realised that what we were looking at was an insider barge, the same as what we'd seen in the Echuca region. What they actually installed these things for, they were actually called skids. And so because they used to load quite large tree trunks into the insides of these things, if they rolled a tree trunk in and hit the planks or the frames, it would actually hold the vessel and send it to the bottom. So what they did was they actually put skids in, which actually went down to the first sister keelson on either side of the main keelson and back up again the other side. And they had an iron flat bar over the top of them, which was designed to both protect the skid itself, but I think also to give structural rigidity. And I'm assuming potentially was also providing structural rigidity in regard to hydrostatic pressures on the sides of the boats, because these things had enormous cargoes in the middle of them. Other vessels of this type later on were actually built with what they called iron topsides, and we'd never seen this before in the state here. Iron topside is basically iron plates that were actually put on top of a timber keel, a lower timber hull, shall I say. One of the first things that we looked at when we went and had a look at a paddle boat called the Alpha was what was originally what we thought was a gudgeon fitting on the side of the stern post was actually part of the iron topside. The reason why they had iron topsides was that these vessels were operating in the middle of very hot Australian conditions. They were normally when they were unloaded, they sat just below the level of where the iron sat on there, so the planks would actually swell up, and so they would be waterproof. But if you had planks above that area and you were in hot conditions, when they went down, they wouldn't have swollen and the vessel would sink. So it was quite an ingenious way of actually making sure the vessel stayed afloat. The steering on these things was really unusual, and this is a characteristic rudder that's on most of the Murray River vessels that we looked at. They have this almost a scalloping shape at the back of them. The back of the rudder is called the tiller. They're not connected with pintles. There's actually gudgeons on both sides, and a central gudgeon pin is actually put down. And one of the reasons that's put in is that it allows the rudder to come up but not to dislocate if it hits a log in the area. It was then steered by chains, so chains would come up to the spreader bars on the sides of the vessel, which would then be fed along the deck and then looped over a typical windlass steering platform that was mounted at deck level. Now, what was interesting about this particular design was you can see here that there was a big roller fitting, so it could be rolled back and forth along the deck, depending on where you wanted to steer it by, or it could be raised depending on the amount of wool bales that you actually had in the middle of the vessel. Because these vessels were being towed, they also needed to be steered because of the Murray River currents. So they were anything up to 6 to 7 bales high, which meant they were often almost the same height again, up above the top of the vessel. They had what's called a bailout in the back. So I don't know whether this is where bailout, the typical naming came from originally, but because these vessels, they often lost control of them, they got too close to the bank and trees would sweep over the top. The man who was steering it could jump into the area where the bale had been taken out and the whole steering platform would be washed over the side and he wouldn't be injured during the process. The second type of industry with boats that I want to talk about started off in the Barmah forest. There was a number of forests up and down the Murray River that actually flood during the middle of winter. But during summer, what they would do is they would go and cut down the trees and they would work out where the centre of the tree was, put a large spike in the middle of it, and then come back in the middle of winter when the forest had actually flooded. And they used these boats, and they were typically described to me as a 12-foot long double-ended boat that had basically been cut in half and planked on the interior side. And then they had a winch mounted over the top, and the winch was actually used to go over the tops of these logs, which were then winched up underneath the vessel, and it was floated out to the main section of the river. That's where we come across these boats. These are the weirdest vessels I've ever seen. These are called outrigger log barges. Now, as I mentioned before, river breadgum doesn't float. So what they would do with these things, these barges were designed to carry extensive logs, so logs of a predetermined size. The longer the log was, the more super feet you would get out of it, so the log was worth more intact than what it was cut up into pieces to be put inside a barge. So the vessel would be brought up to where the logs were. They'd be basically tied up to the side of the riverbank, and they would then use these things, which were basically capstans, very, very crude vernacular capstans, which were used to actually haul the logs alongside, and they'd then be tied to logs that were permanently mounted to the decks of these vessels. Other features that we looked at on these vessels were collision straps here, and also what they call a stem iron, which is very similar to a cutwater. These vessels, another interesting aspect of them was that they had no steering in the traditional form of a rudder. They were basically towed out into the middle of the channel by a paddle steamer once they were fully loaded, and they then had two huge lengths of chain. Each length of chain was probably about 1.5 feet long, and they were dropped over the sides and into the deepest part of the river, and then the river current would actually take the vessel down to the nearest timber mill, and they were then towed into the sides of the timber mill. And the interesting thing with these was that it wasn't possible to tow these vessels upstream fully loaded because of the water resistance of the logs. They're often carrying logs that were 3-4 feet in diameter, and there was often 4 or 5 of them alongside on each side of the vessel, and so the resistance was too far for them too much for them to be towed. One of the interesting features was this was the windlasses, very, very crude windlass, and I just want to draw your attention to that because it came to us later. This is one of the identification features for these types of vessels. Now, there was a different type of outrigger log barge as well too, where often they would take the transverse logs off of it, and they would be used to transport firewood on top of them. These were made by the Murray River Sawmill, and there was 4 of these made, and each the number you see on each one of these is the year that was actually made. And you can see that they actually had a tiller arm actually fitted onto the rudder. The back of the rudder was shorter than the front, which is an unusual feature for rudders in this area. And as I mentioned, they had vernacular capstans. You can see there was 2 of them to basically draw the logs in on each side. They had a king plank that went down the middle through here, and they also these types of vessels had 2 sister keelsons on either side of the main keelson in the interior. Now you might say, well, why are we interested in those features? Well, things we were looking for in the rivers that we actually thought, like in this stage here, was actually a fence post. Turned out to be, this is one of the outrigger log barges wrecks that are in the rivers. And so it's given us more of an indication of the types of sites that we're actually looking for when we're actually going out doing field work. Also, because now we know exactly like what one of these barges looks like. It's got a central king plank, and it's got the sister keelsons on each side. When you will go back to the original side scan image that we found, we were able not only to identify the type of vessel that we were looking at through a side scan. I should say the Murray River is like a chocolate milkshake. You jump in and you've got about half an inch of visibility in the first couple of centimetres, and after that you see nothing. So we were not only able to, from side scans, be able to identify what type of vessel it was, but we were eventually able to identify the vessel itself, which turned out to be one called the Zulu. As part of this field work, we looked at 6 different types of typology of craft. So we're not only the ones I've just covered, we also looked at paddle steamers, paddle boats, should I say. We looked at punts and ferries, which used to take ferry traffic and road traffic across the one side of the rivers to the others. We also looked at where these types of barges were very seagoing in their construction. And so they were easily converted to use in the Gulfs in South Australia later on. And we also looked at the infrastructure. One of the interesting things that we came about looking at this, which was quite unexpected, was the closer to the mouth of the river, the more maritime in the construction, the techniques were used in these vessels. They were very much like oceanic vessels, but the more you moved up the river, the less like a boat they became in their construction techniques inside. And one of the things that we came to the realization was that it was local carpenters were actually making it the same way that they might actually make a building. And so there was this gradual evolution from maritime through to truly riverine craft as you moved up the river. We also looked at other types of vessels. This is ongoing field work that we're looking at here. There was various types of paddle steamers, such as the store boats, which was the equivalent of Sainsbury's going up and down the rivers selling stock to people that had no other township in their areas. There was church boats, the Bethel boats, such as the Atona here. Fishing boats that you looked at here as well too. They would have a small dinghy attached on the front with holes drilled through the middle, so they'd fish, throw the fish into here and lower that boat into the water and keep the fish alive. We also successfully tested this technique at Lake Mulwala a couple of years later, and it absolutely worked. Now we had an indication of the types of vessels we were looking at. This is a paddle steamer. You can see by the sponson deck on the outside here, and this is the Federal barge, which is an insider barge. And we could also look at the type of rudder that you can see here and work out what these 2 vessels were on shore there as well. So look, I won't keep going on. I think I'm very close to time as it is. But we're looking at archaeological characterizations of different types of craft, and we're trying to form typologies of various vessels, not only in this river, but all the way up and down the coast in New South Wales. And aside from this river, we've found 3 or 4 different types of undocumented types of riverine craft that have never been recorded before. We're trying to get together a project. We've been doing this all through New South Wales and working collaboratively with people in Victoria and our counterparts in Queensland and in South Australia. And we're trying to get it up as the Australian Waterways Cultural Landscapes project, where we not only look at shipwrecks, but we look at all the infrastructure and riverine equipment that was actually used in these areas. So thanks very much to these people, and thanks very much for your attention, and thanks for a great conference. It's been fabulous.
Thank you very much, Brad. You covered a lot of ground there. Do we have any questions from the floor? Yes, we have.
Yeah, I have a question about the vessels that were being used to transport the trees. I know from Northwestern European countries that they built rafts of the trees itself to transport them downstream. Why did they use vessels here?
One of the reasons they did the same thing in northern New South Wales, where they were transporting cedar. The cedar will float, one of the reasons they couldn't do it in the rivers here is that as soon as the red gum, because it's such a heavy hardwood, as soon as it hits the water, it sinks. And so that's one of the reasons they were using vessels here, was because you couldn't transport it. You couldn't float them down the rivers. They would just go straight to the bottom. And it's a problem along the whole river system here, is that when the trees fall off the banks and into the rivers, they actually just go straight to the bottom, and they cause snags all the way through the rivers. And there's a different type of craft in the river that was actually used to come along with a big dirty big crane on the front that would actually pull them out and put them onto the sides of the banks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. I see that Marta has her hand up on Zoom. So Marta, do you want to ask your question, please?
Yes, just to add to that question that Brad just got. So indeed, I love to see those photos with the logs on the barges, but also across, because we've always said, yeah, we know that they transported here along the Rhine the conifers as rafts, as you just mentioned. But we always wonder, well, and where are the oaks? I mean, because we have plenty of oaks, and it's not possible that the oaks were transported only on top of the rafts, the conifer rafts, because we don't find all those conifer rafts in the archaeological record. So the transport of oak that we have documented by dendrochronology goes back till Roman times, and it must have been done like that, just exactly like those photos. I love them.
Oh, it blew me away when I first saw those craft. I've never seen anything like it, and everyone I show it has no idea where they've come from. One of the other sides of this project that we're looking at is where does the designs for these craft come from? Where does the designs for the barges, both types of barges come, but also where does the designs for the paddle steamers come from? And I've got this theory in the back of my head that I think is actually starting to bear fruit, in that some of the inside of barge designs are actually coming from England. And I think that there was this push at one stage on the Murray River that they actually wanted to transplant the English and basically the European system of canal transportation across to Australia. And so they started to actually canalize parts of the river. They started to put in locks and weirs, and they had plans to actually back up a lot of the rivers that were too low, so that you could almost get craft all the way down to Melbourne. And so what I'm planning on doing probably next year, if I can, is to come over. I'm interested in where the design for the crafts came from, but I'm also very interested in where the rudder designs came from. So if you have a look at these rudders are very, very different for each craft, but they have this characteristic scalloping on the tops of them, and we still haven't quite worked out where that's coming from. Some of it may be to do with the chain steerage of it, but it's very, very different. And they're basically the size of a barn door, some of them. So, this one here stands almost 3 meters high. So if anyone has got any thoughts on that, I would be very interested to hear from them.
Yes.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
Marta.
you, Brad. Thank you, Marta, for your question. Just to add that Lucy Seaman makes a comment saying that, yes, we're seeing similar things in the States, where high-density woods are being transported using a variety of mechanisms. And I know that there are very significant quantities of at least sunken wood that are now being reclaimed and reused as high-quality materials, resulting from major wood industry extractions, particularly in Florida, Alabama. And so there may well be parallels there too that are worth looking at. I think with that, we are going to have to come to the end of the session. Thank you to Brad. Thank you to all of the speakers for this session. And thank you to all of the speakers, wherever you were, from the whole of the conference this year. And I think we should round up with a last round of applause. And with that, I think blissfully, I have completed my mission as chair and can pass over to the boss.
Thank you very much, Nigel, for this nice last session of the conference. And now I would like to invite the members of our scientific committee, Johan Trepan Holk, Jiří Litvin, and Julia Boeto, to take their places here at the stage. And I would also like to invite Katarina Batur to say some words on behalf of the organizing committee. Thank you.
So hello all. I didn't prepare any speech because this was actually the last minute decision. But before I even start, I would like to thank you all for joining this conference. And I have to say at the very beginning, it was not easy to organize this conference, and the COVID pandemic was not the only obstacle. So since we were all separated and our project stopped, we actually had great difficulties to find funding. And also construction work began in front of our university. So we had a quite large mess in past 2 months when we were trying to organize ourselves and find a proper venue. So if you were asking yourself why we are in Croatian National Theatre, so this is the reason. And our waterfront unfortunately doesn't look like on nice images on Zadar as you've seen. So I would just like to go back from the images of Marseille. I wanted to show what. So it was 2018 when we all gathered last time in Marseille and had such a nice time on Gypties, and we were hosted by Giulia Boeto and Pierre in Museum. And in that moment, you actually all decided that, I don't know why my slides are not turning. Technical issues. So in this moment, you actually, most of you decided that you want to visit Croatia. So here we are, 3 years after. Unfortunately, half of the people are online, but I'm glad that they showed a really great interest, and I would like to thank to all participants that joined Zoom sessions because they were really active in discussions. At the end, we had really several people that they were always initiating discussion, asking questions, and I was really surprised that at one moment it was not quiet. Actually, we had really interaction with online audience. So, right. We started to plan ISBSA 2 years ago. So this was our first meeting, and we had very ambitious plan. Not all of them were conducted at the end, but we really did our best. But we met, as I said, a lot of issues, and most of them are related to this part that we just didn't know how to connect virtual and in-person participation of online attendees and paper and poster presenters. Well, okay. So these are pictures actually showing some of our problems and construction work in front of university, and many of our test sessions that we've done in past 1 week. We actually had a lot of technical issues, and all of you who joined test sessions, so all online participants were invited 1 week before to join some of our test sessions, and it was horrible. I was panicking so hard. I just didn't believe that this would succeed. I said this will be like enormous fail. And I don't know why we even accepted to do these online sessions, but luckily the guys who are our technical support did really amazing job. And I'm really grateful that they really pushed hard during this 1 week and then convinced me actually that there is nothing to worry about. Of course, there are always some technical issues and they appeared during this 1 week, but I consider them mostly as a good way to kill the monotony and to wake up people a little bit during the lectures. And now I will just show you several pictures of our team, because this all would be impossible without their help. So this is our team of students who was always engaged to take care of your registration, to answer your question, sell book, or guide you through the city, or help with whatever you whatever is necessary. Ines, next. So here they are at the registration desk, and we are actually quite happy that we managed to organize this conference without having obligations of wearing masks and having some strict distance between us, because it happened recently that we are actually allowed to conduct such a large meetings. This year we also introduced a special chat session, and this was guided by Anna Maria and Maya. So everybody who visited special chat, I don't know if you've seen, but you could have a look on all posters, and all presenters gave brief representation of their topic. So I'm glad that this year actually poster session got just a bit more attention, and it could be visited from all people worldwide. Of course, we also had technical issues with the spatial chat, but this is always what happens when you rely on online sessions. So this is almost these are almost all team members of organizing committee. I think only Duška is missing. Sorry, Duška, is she here? We will. We will add you. And of course, several pictures of us during the conference and during the preparations. And most of you haven't seen those girls, but they are always in the back. Like, they are behind these curtains at the moment. They are taking care of that Zoom is sharing a screen in proper way, that all your presentations are played, or if they are pre-recorded, they are played in the correct time, and so on, or responding to questions online, which takes also quite a lot of time. So it's not easy really to sit in really tight space for a whole day session and to listen, to wait for a long time until all presentations are done. Most of you probably haven't seen them, but they really did good work. And at the end, I would just like to say thank you all who really put a lot of effort to join this conference, because it was probably not easy for most of you, as you probably didn't do your project since the fundings were cut and there was a COVID pandemic. So I think that it was not maybe easy even to prepare some really good talk. But thank you for your really amazing talks, and we all did it to remember all these persons who inspired us during all these years. With this, I would like to close this little speech, and I hope that you will have a nice weekend if you are staying still in Zadar, and of course that we will see you in Egypt in 3 years. Thank you.
So we also want to thank Kate, because Kate did the amazing job of the secretary of our conference, and she basically organized everything. We all did something, but Okay, having said that, I would like to invite members of the scientific committee to say their impressions shortly, but their impressions about the conference. So we will start with the representative of ISBSA 13 in Amsterdam, André van Gogh.
Thank you, Irena. Yes, let me start with the content of the conference. I think there were very high quality contributions, and I hope that you as attendants agree with me. I personally loved the contributions which have some theoretical background or idea, or are question steered by a certain question. Next, I think the organization was great. So I would also like to thank everybody who participated in the organization of this conference. It was really good organized, I think. And the third point I wanted to make is that so as to speak the context of the conference, it's a lovely country, a nice landscape, beautiful, and I must not forget the friendly people from Croatia, which you meet at the streets or in the restaurants and so on. So that was great. For me, it was a great pleasure to be here, and of course I also learned a lot. I hope you agree with me. I think that's it.
Okay, now it's turn of Jerzy Litwin, ISBSA 14 in Gdansk.
That is the end of the such beautiful organized conference. Sorry to say, but first I want to reflect some ideas from the second such kind of the conference in Bremerhaven, 1979. There was a small conference, very important, about 40 people only, 2 days lectures, and it was very stormy time, February, very cold, extra winter came to Bremerhaven. But for me, as a first time, 45 years ago, it was a great impression and very good motivation for the future, for the research. And of course, I was very happy being able to organize the 8th and the 14th conference of such kind in country, in our museum, in Maritime Museum. And what is most important, that a group of people interested in the maritime archaeology, in the wooden and boat ship archaeology is still growing, and there's still a lot of young people coming. This is very important for future. So I hope that after 3 years, we will see new faces as well, the faces which we are now, with new papers, new materials, with new discoveries, new interpretations, like it happened with Daniel Zwick, who has a good, extraordinary interpretation of the wreck, which has, I think, new idea for a clinker coral construction. So I hope that we will be enjoy also having time during the last coming 3 years, and we will have the time to prepare the good presentation. And all of you, I wish you the pleasant and safety way back to home. And of course, I would like to thank you very much, Irena, and your staff. It's tremendous. It's very nice to see all women working with you, men as well, of course. There's a very strong team, very important team. And when we had the preparation for this meeting, there was the big risk if we were able to organize this conference, pandemia, what will be after a couple of months, particularly in September. But I think it was a great success of you, your decision, because first of all, you are responsible for this possibility to be here and so on. So once again, many thanks, congratulations and wishes to realize your ideas, your ideas and your research. And I am very surprised how big development of the marine archaeology is in Croatia. It's many new wrecks coming, very important for the interpretation of the history of shipbuilding. And I hope you will find a lot of new wrecks. And I wish you to organize also the Maritime Museum in Zadar. It's a very important place. And I think such institution is missing here. So once again, many thanks. I wish you all the best. And of course, hope to see everybody after 3 years in Egypt. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Jerzy. We actually signed the contract for building a maritime museum, who knows when and who knows how, but we will certainly do it sooner or later. Now it's turn of Giulia Boeto, ISBSA16 in Marseille.
Thank you very much. What to say after all these nice discourse and to say something of intelligence to you. So I'd like just to say that one of the idea of the main theme of this conference was how to adapt new technologies to the requirement of historical history of the reconstructions. And I think that we saw a lot of very nice use of new technologies. Of course, the digital technologies that are present everywhere. Maybe most of the presentation that were done here, but also a panel of other methods as analytical methods. I'm thinking about the way to analyze timbers with geochemical or endocrinology. We know that we use isotopes and etc. So now, as nautical archaeologists, we have really a large panel of methods in our hands, and we have to try to find a way to adapt to use in our researchers. And I think that through all the examples that we saw today, we can imagine and can also try to apply in our personal or official projects. For the other, I'd like to say another things, and I think that in Croatia is really a place where this changing that is completely is now in our way of work is one of the places where it was used in first, and that I learned that was really useful to continue. So, and they did demonstrate, I think, with this organization done by person and also in the virtual way, and the big capacity to adapt in any moment to the situation and to have arrive to have a good result with the conference. So I was really happy about this and all the results that we have today here. And I would like to special thanks to Irena and all the group. I'm very proud to work here and from 2007, and it's really a pleasure and this fulfillment that's make me very happy today. So thank you, Irena. Thank you to everybody, to the team ratings.
Thank you, Giulia, and thank you all for the beautiful words. I have to say that we're just happy that we reached the end of the conference without any serious problem. We had great time with you. I hope that you had great time with us also. And we are looking forward to seeing you all in Alexandria. That's everything from my side, because we were in the organization, so we just hope that everything will work out fine, and it did. We just have some optional activities left, so it is not the actual part of the conference. So we actually reached the end of the conference safely, and we are very happy about it. Thank you. So now, when the conference is officially done, when we reached the end of the conference, I just wanted to remind you about these optionals. So if you care about sailing with Latin sail, please be at the bridge, at the Zadar bridge. You can see it here on the map. So I don't know whether this thing would be, okay, so this is the Zadar bridge. It is very close from here. You just cross the National Square and you are there. And at 6:30 at the outer side of the bridge, 7 or 8 Latin sailors will sail around for half an hour or 45 minutes or so. So you can enjoy their sailing appearance, let's say. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, you were asked to book for the sailing, but everybody who didn't do it can also join. It doesn't matter. So now we have about 20 people on the list, but even if the list is longer, it doesn't matter. So we will meet at the big pier at the Zadar waterfront. So the big pier is the only pier protruding from the Zadar waterfront, this one in the middle between the university and the sea organ. So the university is here. The university is here. And this is the big pier, yes. So the university, the pier, and the sea organ is at the tip of the peninsula. So at the waterfront that is in front of Zadar, that is facing the Zadar channel, there is just one pier, one single big pier. You cannot miss it. It is in front, nearly in front of the forum. So we will meet there at 10 o'clock. We will arrange the groups and we will make you sail. I don't know what the sailing will be like because it depends on the wind, whether it will be a tough sailing or it will be just some experimentation with the Latin sail, but I promise that it will be for sure a nice experience. Who wants to try it, please come. And with this, I am done and see you all in Alexandria. Bye-bye.